Sure, sure, that's fine.
We have your books here,
Very nice.
so we are going to distribute them.
Hmm?
We're still expecting a few more people, but we're not
Sure,
going to
sure.
wait for
No,
them.
no, I agree. I
It's
think
okay.
it's no. I think let's get, yeah, because people are waiting online.
Okay.
And
Hello, everybody. So please take your seats, and we are starting our last session for today. Alex, you want? Uh, I'll get you another one. Yes, no worries. Hello, everyone. My name is Andre Guno. I am the president of Silicon Valley Innovation Center. We have a great speaker today. And we have not just a speaker, but also the author of this book that we are going to distribute in the end of this session. Navi Radjou is an innovation and leadership strategist based here in Silicon Valley. He's also a fellow at Judge Business School, University of Cambridge, and a World Economic Forum faculty member. He's a member of World Economic Global Agenda Council on Design Innovation and a regular columnist on Harvard Business Review. Navi has a really long list of achievements here, and I'm not going to
keep it short. Keep it short.
okay,
Yeah, exactly.
I'll keep it short, but very impressive. That's all I can say. He's, as I said, co-author of this book, Jugaad Innovation. Hopefully, you will explain us
Absolutely.
what this actually means.
Yes, absolutely.
And now, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Andre, for this warm welcome, and delighted to be here. And thanks again for Silicon Valley for hosting me this evening. Yes, in a few minutes you will understand what the strange word Jugaad means. But the title of my presentation this evening, as you can see, is Building an Agile Enterprise. Think frugal, be flexible, generate breakthrough growth. And this is based indeed on this book that I wrote about 2 years ago. And so the book kind of started about, I would say, 6-7 years ago. I would say even 15 years ago, because I've been large companies in US and Europe on their innovation strategies. And about 6 years ago, we began to hear some interesting complaints from executives in these large companies that we consulted. They were beginning to essentially say that we have a problem because we keep investing a lot of R&D dollars, but somehow we are not necessarily more innovative. So because it's true, right? When you think about innovation, people think R&D, research and development. So when you look at the history of innovation in the Western world or in the Western corporations, what I want to talk about is the need for rethinking innovation and think about how you innovate differently in today's world by not necessarily simply thinking that more R&D investment means more innovation. If you look at large companies in the world, they spent billions of dollars in R&D in the last few decades. As a matter of fact, in 2013 alone, it's estimated that the world's 100,000 largest R&D spenders spent about $640 billion in R&D. Now, research after research studies show that there is no correlation between how much you invest in R&D and how innovative you are in terms of new products and services launched or your market capitalization or other financial metrics. So many corporate leaders, like CEOs, look a bit like this person who says, we spent $2 billion in R&D and all we got was this, lousy t-shirt. So there's a kind of big dissatisfaction, frustration in the board level to understand how come on one hand we invest so much in R&D, on the other hand there's nothing that comes out of it. So we studied that, and what we discovered is the problem in large companies is that because they spend so much money on R&D, they also tend to become conservative because they want to get the best return possible on the investment. To do that is by creating more structure, more processes that will create an illusion of stability and repeatability. So these processes are fantastic when the world is stable because it gives efficiency. But the same processes become a handicap when the world begins to change because the company then becomes too stifled by the same structured environment. This is something that I'm not saying. One company that literally invented the notion of processes complains about it, which is Beth Comstock, the chief marketing officer of GE, very large industrial company, as you know. And she said in 2012 that our traditional teams are too slow, we are not innovating fast enough, and we need to systematize change. Why they say that? Because this is a company for about 100 years, as you know, was set up by Thomas Edison in the early 20th century, and since then has been very focused on building big industrial equipment, aircraft engines, power turbines, etc. devices. But their concern is that in 5 years, the biggest competition may not come from other industrial companies, but rather from the GAFA. GAFA, as you know, is an acronym for Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon. Why suddenly these are going to become their competition is because once their industrial devices are connected to the internet, this is called Internet of Things, you can then use the data, big data, to then offer valued services on top of that. And that's something that can be done by anyone and not necessarily General Electric. So the challenge for them moving forward is how do we innovate not like a big industrial company that takes 7 years to make an aircraft engine, but more like a Google or a Facebook or Amazon, which can crank out new services online in a matter of days, if not weeks. So that's one big frustration, right? How do you get agility in large companies? The second big issue we are facing also in the Western world is that even if you make very sophisticated products, people don't have money to buy it. I know in Silicon Valley it may not have, because the average GDP per capita, I live in Palo Alto, is the highest in the world, I guess, if not in the US. So we live sometime in a bubble in this part of the United States. But here's the stark, dark reality of this country. Between 2006 and 2010, the average American family lost about 40% of its wealth. Today, the top 20% earners in this country account for about 60% of consumer spending today. The income inequality between the richest and the poorest in this country is called the Gini index. Today puts America almost the same level as Mexico or Philippines. That's how bad things are. So there is kind of a growing, if you like, income gap. That's one problem, which is also rendering a lot of middle-class people worried about the future. And in the scenario in Europe is even worse. In 2008, the purchasing power started dipping, and since has on recovered. And if you look at recent statistics, it's quite scary. I was talking to the chief economist of a large multinational. They expect there might be a double dip, another big crisis coming to Europe soon. That means that 0 to 1% growth is something that most politicians are happy to have in most European countries right now. So that also means that the consumers in the West are becoming more frugal. They want more value for limited money they have. Not only they are value focused, they're also value conscious, because what is statistics are showing now is that these consumers, especially young people, I see some of you in the audience, people who are the youngest one below 35, they believe that they are becoming frugal not because they don't have money, but because they choose to be frugal. More than 40% of young Europeans today do not want to buy a car. They want to have access to a car when they want it as a service, but they don't want to own a car, right? So the relationship between consumer products and young people is also changing very quickly. So frugality is becoming also a matter of values, not just about value. And this is also showing up in other studies that show that not only the consumers are becoming frugal and values conscious, they also want companies to be more values conscious as well. So this is research done by Nielsen that shows that almost the majority of consumers now around the world want to buy products and services for companies that are socially responsible and environmentally conscious. 70% young people want to work for companies that embody these values as well. Okay? So given all this, we begin to look for a new model of innovation. We told ourselves that the current model of innovation is very expensive, it's too rigid, and thirdly, it's a bit too insular and too elitist. Only a few engineers, scientists are supposed to innovate. But increasingly, as you can see, innovation has to open up and become more inclusive and more collaborative as well. So we told ourselves, where can we find a better model of innovation that will be more cost effective, will bring more agility to companies, and then will provide for more collaboration as well. So we told ourselves that maybe this new model may exist in other parts of the world that we haven't studied before, namely the so-called emerging markets. So why emerging markets are going to become important is because today, 2/3 of the middle class lives in US and Europe. In about 20 years, 2/3 of middle class will live in China, India. Altogether, they will have 3 billion consumers in the world. Okay. By the way, does anyone know which is going to be the third largest market in the world in 2050? Just a quiz. So which one? China will be number one, 1.6 billion people. So, yeah. Second would be India, 1.55 billion, roughly. And then it's a country not in Asia. It's actually, sorry, no. It's in the world map, it's kind of in the middle. It's in the middle. So Russia would be more in on the right-hand side. So it's Nigeria. Nigeria will have over 700 million people, I believe, at that time, and it will have about 1 billion people by 2060 or 2070, which is, so that's also important, right? So there are going to be also these new markets that are going to emerge as well. But the point is that I wanted to look at these emerging markets to figure out how, with these fast-growing economies, how do entrepreneurs and companies in those regions innovate? How do they come up with products and services, maybe in a different way than we do in the West? So what we discovered is that the entrepreneurs in emerging markets actually think very differently. And let me give an example. Let's say that you work for, you're an engineer and you work for a big company that makes, fridges, right? Like Whirlpool or, Maytag or GE Appliances or any of these people. You come to work on Monday morning thinking, what if I can develop a fridge that can talk to my cell phone? Because then if I don't have milk in the fridge, I can get a text message, SMS, to go get a liter of milk, right? That's a nice idea. But someone in India asked himself a more fundamental question, which is, what if my fridge can work without electricity? Now, this is what I call a big what if question. Most innovations start with what if, right? And why this is a big what if is because 700 million Indians do not have access to electricity. So it doesn't matter how clever your fridge is if you cannot use electricity to operate it, right? And interestingly, this question was not asked by someone with a PhD or an MBA, by someone actually who didn't even finish his high school. I wanted to meet Mansukh Prajapati, a porter by training from India. Mythicool, which in my opinion is the world's greenest fridge. It consumes no electricity, is made entirely of clay, and is 100% biodegradable, and it can keep fruits and vegetables fresh for 5 days using the principle of evaporation that absorbs water and heat, by dripping water, and then retains humidity in the lower chambers. Fruits and vegetables can be kept fresh for 5 days and milk fresh for a couple of days, which is fantastic for 70% Indians who live in villages where they may not have electricity or regular food supply. Okay? So the first thing we discovered in emerging market is that scarcity is not a constraint. It's actually a source of creativity, and therefore scarcity is the mother of invention. The next thing we discovered is that if scarcity is the mother, we wanted to find out who is the father. So we did some DNA test, and we discovered that adversity is actually the father of invention in emerging markets. So human beings, when we face problems, adversity, constraints, we have two reactions. We fight or we flight, right? Fight or flight. But in emerging markets, we find a third path, a third way, which consists in using the adversity to your advantage. Like alchemist, you convert adversity into an opportunity. Let me give you an example. This is Kanak Das, a young man who got tired of riding his bicycle in his village in India, which was filled with potholes and bumps, so it slowed him down. So imagine you were an engineer for a car company. You would have designed an absorber, right? Shock absorber to absorb the shock in the roads. He actually did something more interesting. He actually created a device, makeshift device, that he attached to his bicycle that converts the bumps in the road into acceleration energy. So the more bumps in the road, the faster the bike rides. Okay? So this is, a very interesting way, of seeing the problem, not as a problem, but actually as an opportunity. Okay? And you see a lot of this kind of what I call frugal ingenuity, this cleverness, in many of these emerging markets. In Africa, it's very common to recharge your cell phone using bicycles. There are many entrepreneurs who do that as a job. That's how they earn money. Okay? So in Peru, this is my favorite example. Peru is a country, Lima particularly, the capital of Peru in South America. It's a country that has 98% humidity a year and only 1 inch of rainfall. So a local engineering college in Lima has developed this giant advertising billboard that uses the sheer size of the surface to absorb humidity in the air, and it condenses it, purifies it, and generates over 90 liters of drinkable water every day. Okay? So literally they can create water out of thin air, right? So, and again, right, adversity and constraints become actually a source of innovation. And now you begin to see this kind of mindset being applied on a larger scale to offer basic services like healthcare, education, energy to billions of people around the world. This is Dr. Devi Chetty in southern India, who operates a giant health campus with about 5,000 beds, and he can do a for 1,400 euros, which is about 1,700, let's say $2,000, which is about 1/10 of what you get charged in the United States. Okay, and he has opened a hospital in the Cayman Islands to serve U.S. patients as well. Okay, so affordable health care, quality care at large scale, you can do it as well, and he has shown it's possible. And the success rate, by the way, is higher than the success rate of U.S. hospitals. Okay, so again, low cost does not mean poor quality. That's something that we'll again later. That's a myth. But I think the continent that is going to really teach us how to innovate differently, better, is going to be Africa. Simply because Africa, 80% of Africans do not have a bank account. But 80% Africans have a mobile phone. So one of the core principles of innovation that we don't learn in Silicon Valley is you have to use what is abundant to address what is scarce. Don't complain you don't have money. Celebrate what you have to deal with the shortage of what you don't. So this is a case in point. So very example, concretely, what happened is that this is in Kenya. It's a service called M-Pesa, which allows Kenyans to receive money on the mobile phone without having a bank account. So half the population of Kenya, and over 30% of the country's GDP is transacted to this system now. Okay? So the question is, they may never have to set up bank branches in Kenya in the future, unlike here, right? So if they don't need a formal banking system, what else they don't need? Because once you have mobile banking, that's like an iPhone. It's a platform, right? Then you can start plugging iApps, application services, products and services you can buy with mobile money. Well, that's what's happening. The same company that launched it has launched M-Kopa, which is a device that is a home solar system solution. It comes with the 3 LED lamps, a cell phone charger, and a solar radio. And the whole thing cost $200, which is expensive for most Kenyans. But mobile money can save the day. So what happens is now you buy this equipment for $35 upfront deposit, and then you make a micro payment using a mobile phone of 45 cents every day. And once you make 365 micro, the system is unlocked, and you own the product, and you start receiving clean, free electricity. Okay? This is an ingenious solution, right? So again, they may not have to set up formal, electricity grids. They go straight to distributed, clean energy. right? And then if you look in the science world, this kind of mindset is also creating magic. Because, we always say, yeah, but this is all nice, healthcare, education, but only in the US we can send a man to the moon, or we can send a satellite, mission to Mars. Until now, yes, but that's no longer the case. As a matter of fact, last November, the NASA spent 700 million and took 5 years to create, a satellite that went to Mars. And the same month, India also sent a mission to Mars for 10 times less cost and 3 times faster. And he entered the Mars orbit on 26th of September this year. India became the fourth country in the world to have accomplished that. Not only they accomplished that, they also showed that they can accomplish that much cheaper and much faster than the West. Okay, so this is called frugal science. Interestingly, it's being pioneered both in Berkeley, in Stanford. We'll talk about that later. There are some interesting programs in both universities and Santa Clara University, 3 major academic institutions in the Valley who are beginning to talk about engineering and frugal science. This is something that you'll hear about more and more, which is essentially how can you do scientific discoveries and progress without having to spend billions of dollars, essentially, right? So we looked at in the book, there are many other examples like this, of these very clever solutions from emerging markets, but our interest was to really find out, is there some kind of, secret formula, secret method used by all these entrepreneurs? Because we are consultants and academics, we like these methods. Unfortunately, sadly, there was no secret formula. That was a bad news. We couldn't find any formula. Instead, what we discovered is that almost all these innovators, more or less, share a very unique mindset, a particular kind of perspective or worldview. And for lack of a better term, we ended up calling it Jugaad. So Jugaad is a Hindi word from India. It simply means the ability to convert adversity into an opportunity and the ability to do more with less, right? So there are 2 ideas here. One is, how do you deal with problems in a very positive way? And secondly, how can you be frugal, that is, do more, create more value with fewer resources? So in a nutshell, Jugaad, think about that as a new way of thinking about innovating faster, better, cheaper. And my book essentially talks more about that, but I think for the sake of time, what I will do is to begin to show why this approach becomes very relevant for companies. Because in a way, what I see this approach bringing to companies is more agility. Basically, so that companies become more like a jazz band and can innovate in a more faster, fluid, improvised way, instead of acting like a big orchestras, right? Very structured, very top-down, very hierarchical, the pyramid model, right? So what I try to explain in the book is, how do you, if you are this kind of company, how do you begin to connect with the spirit of this model, okay? Do that effectively, then our value proposition is that as a company, you can become frugal, do more with less. You can become more agile to deal with problems and opportunities faster, and become more inclusive in 2 levels. Inclusive in terms of leveraging more people in your ecosystem to co-innovate. This is called open innovation. And inclusive also because with the reduction in purchasing power of the middle class in US and Europe, you need to figure out inclusive business models to serve these segments of the population who are losing, their purchasing power, right? So what I want to do is go through now the 3 pillars of Jugaad. Essentially, the first one is frugality, which is how can you do more with less? Now, this notion of doing more with less sounds very strange, because innovation is always about doing more with more, right? Think of iPhone 5, 6, 7, 8, more features, right? Speech recognition, then I don't know what is going to come next. I can only guess. Adding more features, right? But there's a trend now. It's called frugal innovation or frugal engineering. The idea now is, can we create good enough products that may not address 200% of customer needs, over-engineered solution, which is expensive, but addresses 70-80% of what you need as a customer, but cost you twice cheaper solution in the marketplace. Okay, this is something that has been practiced in the car industry, which you can imagine, right? It's always, more sophisticated cars, right? We talk about, driverless cars, right? But on the other hand, there are people who cannot afford cars at all, even classic cars, right? So looking at this, Renault, which is a big company in Europe, launched in 1999 a program to create a $6,000 car, which was at that time 5,000 euro. Okay, and this is a program that was launched by, at that time, CEO Louis Schweizer. And he initially wanted to develop that for Middle East and other emerging markets, which low-income, consumers. And to their surprise, this car became a big hit in 2004 when it was launched in Western Europe. Since then, they've expanded this product into an entire product line called Dacia. And Dacia has become now the cash cow of the company. This is the entry-level products of Renault. This entry-level product line accounted for less than 1% of their global sales in 2004. Last year, it accounted for over 40% of their global sales. So much so, Dacia is the fastest growing brand as you know, it was built in Romania, which is also interesting to know. But today, it's the fastest growing brand in Western Europe and even in Germany, the country of BMW. As a matter of fact, Volkswagen has announced a plan to create the low-cost vehicle as well. Okay, so that is, that's something to remember. There's a big market, not only in emerging markets for these kind of products, but even in more mature economies as well. So now, Carlos Ghosn, who is the CEO of Renault Nissan, is now writing the next chapter in the Frugal innovation journey. So he is a very interesting person because he was born in Brazil from Lebanese parents, and today is running a global alliance of French car maker Renault and car maker Nissan. So now they are on taking this Frugal innovation journey to the next level. And for that, they are looking at emerging markets because he happens to be the CEO who coined this concept of frugal engineering in 2006 because he went often to India and he was quite impressed to see Indian engineers being able to innovate much cheaper and much faster than the French engineers or Japanese engineers. So he coined this concept of frugal engineering, which is, can we do engineering frugally, more value for less? And now they are applying these principles of frugal engineering to develop the next generation. And to make that happen, Gérard de Troubaix was the person who co-led the development of this Logan and then the Dacia vehicles. And so now he's living in southern India in the city of Chennai, where I'm from, which is very tropical, very humid climate where you have to deal with very horrendous traffic jams like this one. And the idea again is to build empathy with the drivers in emerging markets, right, who have to drive in very bad conditions. You need a car that is robust, stable, and yet comfortable and also affordable. So this is a tough challenge. How do you create a car that is, ultra affordable without compromising quality and yet reliable and comfortable? So for that, they are developing a new vehicle platform. It's called CMF-A. This is a big story because most car companies, they may sometime make a new car outside their quarters. But it's much harder to find a car company to decide to create a whole new car platform outside their quarters. Okay? They are building it in southern India right now. It's called CMF-A, which is going to be shared between Renault and Nissan to create a new generation of ultra low-cost vehicles that will be destined for emerging markets like India, Brazil, and Africa. And potentially, who knows, may come back in the West as well. Another example of somebody who's practicing this notion of frugal engineering is Siemens, which makes, among other things, medical equipment. And the engineers of Siemens in China came up with this. So this is an interesting message. The last message was you can create something which is low cost and good quality, but may not be technically sophisticated, right? This is the next message, is that you can also make something technologically advanced affordable and usable. So this is actually a 126 slice CT scanner, which is a high-end CT scanner. Cost a fortune in the West. But the Chinese engineers, not only is it cost a fortune, but you need a PhD to operate it because it's very complex to use it, right? So the engineers in China came up with the 126 slice CT scanner, which is actually more energy efficient and easier to use even by people who may not be doctors, like nurses or technicians. And this is a great solution for China because China will be home to 500 million elderly people by 2050. Okay, it's a population which is aging very, very fast. That means more chronic problems, etc. So the healthcare system needs to be, managed in a way that care can be delivered even in small towns. They may not have many doctors, right? So devices have to be good quality, affordable, and most importantly, easy to use. So that's what they try to do, and highly, efficient. So this device, very quickly, can scan more patients than existing CT scanners, the same range. It is actually cost 30% less per treatment and reduces the radiation dosage by 60%, which is important for the health of the patient as well. Okay? And this solution was initially designed for the Chinese market, but the number one market today for this product called Somatome is United States. Okay? Because as you know, with the Obamacare, you heard about the healthcare reform in this country. Hospitals and providers in this country have to deliver better care at lower cost. So this kind of device becomes very useful in this country as well. And this is just to show that Siemens actually believes that this kind of product is part of a bigger product they are building right now. It's called SMART. It's an acronym for simple, maintenance-friendly, affordable, reliable, timely market. And they believe there is a $200 billion market for these kind of entry-level products right now around the world. Okay? And also, they have many patents on these products. Again, it shows that you can make something which is frugal and yet inventive and defensible as well. Okay? The third example of frugal innovation comes from Unilever. Unilever, as you know, makes soaps, detergents, all kind of consumer products. They compete with Procter & Gamble. They are the two biggies in the world. Their CEO declared in 2010 that he wants to double the company's revenue in 2020. So go from a 40 billion euro company to an 80 billion euro company by 2020. At the same time, reduce environmental impact, carbon footprint by 50%. So do more with less. Why they have to do this? Today they serve 2 billion consumers in the world. In the next 20 years, they want to serve another 2 billion consumers, total of 4 billion consumers. If you want to serve that many people, you need resources. And he says at the pace at which we are consuming and producing, we need 3 planets to supply us in resources. That's not sustainable. So we need to figure out a new way to make maybe detergents that come in a more condensed format, consumes less water and less energy as well. And that's what they are focusing on doing now, rethinking the old and all the supply chain to make it more energy and water efficient. So that's the first part, which is the frugality, which is do more with less. The second part is about agility, which is how do you deal with new opportunities, new challenges by being very agile, very quick. So here I want to quickly go through some examples here of how to bring agility even in some industries. Lean startup, all this concept, I know it's nice, in the Silicon Valley because you deal with software. But how do you do lean startup when you make drugs? Hello? Well, you might say, well, that's hard. Actually, it can be done, except that you have to think differently about how you make drugs themselves. For example, today, the drugs are made in batch mode across multiple factories. So basically, there's one factory that makes, the first step of the production process, which creates, the semi-finished product, then goes into a second factory, and so on and so forth. So you have these big factories that end up, making these drugs in large volume. So now, at MIT, they are developing this next generation manufacturing model for the pharmaceutical industry, which is funded by Novartis, which is a big pharmaceutical company. And they are able now to take the entire drug manufacturing process and put it in a small scale in the system, which can be put in a container the size of no bigger than this room. Okay, and they have run a test to see how quickly they can make drugs with this new system, and they can take a drug that takes 12 months to make it in 6 hours. Okay, so this is called continuous manufacturing. This is a new approach to manufacturing in the chemical and pharmaceutical industry, and the first use this process is going to go live in 2017. Okay, and the rivals of Novartis, GlaxoSmithKline, Sanofi, and others, Genzyme, which is here, they're all also, second example of agility, which is coming from General Electric. I told you earlier about how General Electric is facing the problem of competing with these, technology companies. So Beth Comstock, the CMO of General Electric, I had the pleasure of hosting a panel in San Francisco at the Commonwealth Club, which is like a think tank, bring on stage to show how a large company, $160 billion revenue, GE, is learning to partner with nimble startups or nimble entrepreneurs. This is Mark Hatch, the CEO of Tech Shop, which is the do-it-yourself workshop environments. This is Hallie Teko, who is the CEO of Digital Healthcare Accelerator in San Francisco, and this is who runs a think tank focused on financial inclusion. So I want to show you quickly how a large company can start to innovate much faster in a much nimbler fashion as well. So several things that the Beth Comstock has done. One of them is this partnership with a company called, how many of you have heard about Quirky? Yes, okay, 2 people. So Quirky, it was founded by a 22-year-old entrepreneur, I know, very young, Ben Kaufman, that you see here. And it's based in New York. And here you see Ben Kaufman with Mark Little, the head of R&D of GE, and Beth Comstock, head of marketing. So Quirky is essentially a crowdsourcing open innovation platform. So if you have an idea for a new product, you want to make a better mouse or a better mic, you just submit an idea. And then Quirky has a community of designers and engineers who look at your ideas. And if they like one of your ideas, which is promising, they will approve that idea. And then it goes into a development process. And then they find market opportunities for you as well, because they have partnership with retailers like Auchan in Europe and Amazon. So the idea is that why GE is doing it, they're thinking, well, if we have some technologies that we are not using, we can put it on this platform. And then we can have some other inventors who have ideas to build products. Okay? And the inventor, of course, gets between 10-15% of the sales revenue. At the same time, the rest goes to GE and Quirky as well. So it's a fantastic way of really monetizing, creating more value from intellectual property not be using. So they came up with some interesting products like Aros, which is a smartphone controlled air conditioner, which is available now on Amazon and on retailers. Was invented by a retired IT engineer, which is interesting. And now they are taking it to the next level, thinking, well, it's one thing to create a nice appliance, but can we take some complex products like aircraft engines and start open sourcing the improvement, new features can be added to that product. They can be done. As a matter of fact, last year they hosted a big competition online to invite developers around the world, engineers, to improve a particular component product. It's called the jet engine loading bracket, so that it can be made lighter and can be printed with a 3D printer. Okay? And the competition was won by a young engineer from Indonesia who developed this solution, which is 84% lighter than existing component and can be made with a 3D printer, which is fantastic because it allows GE to custom print the spare part anywhere they want in the world. Okay? Interestingly, this engineer had no experience in aviation, which is amazing. Okay? So that is also something you find more and more, is that if you have more experience, sometimes there could be handicap because you cannot really think outside the box. Versus rookies, people with no experience sometimes be more creative. Okay? And now G is taking it to the next level with something called G garages. These are actually mobile units, trucks that are equipped with industrial equipment like 3D printers, but it could also have a CNC cutters or laser cutters. And then they go to city to invite citizens to hop in and learn new manufacturing skills like soldering, welding, and then they can start making their own products. Some of the products could be for your personal use or for your community use, but if you come up with some really interesting product, G is interested in talking to you in how to take it, to the market commercially. Okay, so this is like crowdsourcing a large scale. But what is fascinating is that first they did that in Boston, Washington D.C., and then they didn't go straight to Europe or Asia. They went to Lagos, Nigeria. Right now they are in Algeria, and next stop is Turkey. That also shows where G thinks are the next future markets. Okay. Now, the third kind of pillar to kind of wrap up on is the notion of inclusivity, right? So I talked about inclusivity in the sense that more and more consumers around the world, both in emerging markets but also in developing countries, may not have the money to buy sophisticated products. So you need to start thinking about how do you include these people, not by doing charity or philanthropy or what we call CSR, social responsibility. That's not good because research shows more and more that if you give anything free or anything which is like charity, people never use it, right? But people will keep using something if they put some money in it, right? Or even better, if they can co-create it with you, right? So for that, how do you do co-creation with consumers? Well, some companies are trying to do that. This is Essilor. They make the glasses, eyeglasses. And they started with a very simple observation is that today there are 2.5 billion people around the world who are poor-sighted. They cannot see properly. And of which 550 million live in India. So they launched an interesting project. Two things they did. One is they launched a new business unit, not a philanthropy, a business unit called 2.5 New Vision Generation to address this problem. And one of the implementation of their initiative is in India. It's called iMitra, where they train young people in villages to go door to door in villages to test the eyes of old people, for example, and then they prescribe lenses that are manufactured locally at a fraction of the cost they cost here, which is quite expensive, as you can imagine, as you know, in US or Europe, right? So the idea is that it also creates jobs for local communities, and more importantly, the consumers trust the product recommended by the local young people because they are part of the same community. Okay, so this is why the key message here is that cheap is one thing, but accessibility is more important. How do you take your product to these people who may not be able to come to the optician in a city, right? So if the people cannot come to the product has to go to the people. Okay, that's what we call accessibility. And a similar vein, you also see the notion of inclusion in another level, which is how do you include smart people in emerging markets, which include universities, startups, and that's something that large multinationals, when they go to emerging markets, they will put a big office, recruit 1,000 people, and then put another big R&D office and recruit hundreds of engineers and scientists, and then claim that we do R&D in India and China and Brazil or maybe Kazakhstan, right? But what Xerox did is more interesting. To India, by the way, you know that Xerox has a big R&D lab not far from here in Menlo Park. It's actually the famous lab. This is where a lot of things like graphical user interface on a computer, the mouse, everything was invented there. The problem is they invented very well, but they also invented something called not invented here, which is a way of saying that we are the smartest people, so we don't need any help from outside, right? So now Xerox learned from that mistake. No, we need to open up. We need to look out for best ideas outside our own organization. So they did that I had the pleasure to keynote the opening Innovation Hub, which is the first innovation center, research center outside the Western world. It's in India. And what they did essentially is that before hiring engineers and scientists, they first hired people with the title of Open Innovation Managers. So these are people who are supposed to look in India what is happening in universities, what's happening in startups, and then find out how to partner with these actors, local actors, and then only do what we call space analysis, which is figure out what are the areas where local capabilities are not able to respond, and only in those areas Xerox will invest their own people to build capabilities. Okay? So it's a nice way of saying that let's not reinvent the wheel. If people are already doing something interesting in India, let's partner with them instead of duplicating efforts. Right? And that's how they, within 4 years, have made this center in India one of the top performing center in the world in the network. Okay? So I have this paper you can read later on MIT management review I published on how in emerging markets multinationals can build these kind of partner ecosystems instead of just opening offices and R&D centers, right? But I want to close on this idea that this notion of inclusion is important not only for emerging markets but for developed economies as well. Take America, the so-called first world economy, right? We have, of course, one of the highest GDP per capita, but it's all relative because research shows that 68 million Americans, 1/5 of the US population, is today underbanked or unbanked sometimes. That means that the existing banking services are either too complex, sophisticated, or too expensive to address the basic needs of these 70 million people. Right? So this is creating an interesting opportunity, and you'll begin to see in Silicon Valley a lot of startups getting into this business of targeting this community, which is, this is the size of the French population, right? That's a big market, right? And the banks are not interested, these guys. Yet, this 70 million people altogether have a disposable income of 1 trillion, okay, which is huge. That means if you can come up with the right business model, you can capture that huge market, right? So you begin to see some interesting innovation coming from Silicon Valley. This is called Pay Near Me, which starts with the simple idea that low-income people may have access to sometime a computer, but they may not have a debit card. That happens, believe it or not. And today in this country, $1.2 trillion of commerce is done with cash. It's a very cash-intensive economy, right, US. So the idea is how can you go online and pay your rent, utility bill, or even on Amazon buy products using cash? You cannot do that often. But this one, you can go to Amazon.com, anyway, long story short, and you can make a purchase, say payment model is Pay Near Me, and then it's a text message with a code, and then you can go to a 7-Eleven store and pay with cash. So the idea is to marry the digital world with the analog world. Okay? So you're going to see more and more of these innovations. This is called financial inclusion. This is something that we heard in emerging markets, but this is becoming a huge topic in US as well. So the key messages I would say to kind of conclude on. The first message is that the notion of emerging markets is not geographic specific. Emerging markets is not just Africa, India, China, or any parts of the world that you see in big reports. There are emerging markets within developed countries as well, right? 70 million Americans, right? That's a big market to go after, right? So the question is, how do you put new lenses through which you can see these emerging markets? Because my prediction is that if you can serve consumers in India and China, that mindset can be useful to serve these segments in mature economies as well. So that's the first kind of message. The second message is that there's a big notion that is becoming very important now, is the notion of, we call it the circular economy. This is a big idea that is being endorsed by the World Economic Forum. McKinsey has built an entire practice around it. Big consultants are getting into it. Government, political leaders swear by it. So what it is? Well, it's very simple. If you look at the existing economy model, it is a linear economy. That means You extract raw materials from earth or mines. You design a product, produce the product, people use it, and then it ends in a landfill, right? Today, I believe there are over 100 million cell phones disposed in US alone, I believe. It's huge, right? It's because we think linearly, right? We take materials from somewhere, we don't know where it's made, we just consume it and we get rid of it, right? But the new model is, what if we can create products that can be reused again and again? This is something that is called cradle to cradle design. So instead of cradle to grave, it's cradle to cradle. Can you reuse? It's also called green chemistry as well. Very good example is right now. You see this carpet we're sitting on? This is made by companies like Interface or Target, which are the leading companies in this space. And both companies want to become circular companies by 2020. What that means is that 95% of the carpet, the materials in the carpet can be reused and recycled again and again. Okay? So they are rethinking the whole supply chain from the design all the way to disposal. How do you reuse, materials again and again? Because for simple reason is because the things that you need, IKEA, right? IKEA consumes the world's 1% of total wood production, IKEA alone. And they want to double the revenues, I believe. I forgot the number. It's not sustainable, right? They cannot keep using more wood. So they are thinking the same thing. How do we reuse? How do we share, furniture in the future, right? So this is called circular economy. And there are some pioneers of this, as I said, carpet makers. There's a detergent company in San Francisco called Method, which does that as well. This is a new wave. And the World Economic Forum believes that if companies and economies can embrace these principles, by 2025, major economies can increase the value in their society by $1 trillion. Okay? So this is why a lot of people are getting into it as well, because there is money to be saved and money to be made, okay, by rethinking entirely the value chain. And this is a quick example from an entire country that is embracing it. The Scandinavians are always ahead of the curve, as you know, and this is in Denmark. This is an industrial park, and I think if you want to build an industrial park in some of your regions, this is a nice model. It's called industrial symbiosis. What it means is that your waste becomes my gold. Okay? So the idea is that one factory creates waste that gets used as input by another factory. Okay? So for example, you can take waste from the steel industry and use it to make cement. Okay? So it's a win-win because the cement is more robust and you don't need more processing. And other way, the company doesn't have to invest in resources to dispose of the waste. Right? So it has an impact on resource saving and reduction in gas emission, CO2. Right? So this is something that the Kallenberg has done it in Denmark. It's a completely fully integrated closed loop system with about 10 companies which share the waste and energy. Right? So waste can be gold. Think about that in the future, right? Think circular, as I say, right? The third one is the notion of how do you embrace this, what is called the maker movement. So the maker movement is something that was born here in California. As a matter of fact, I'm proud to say it was born right here in San Mateo. Yes. Actually, it was born in 2006 as a small festival where, the tinkerers, we call them MacGyver, in the US, people who come up with, clever products, clever ideas of, making things with their hands. They can actually showcase these, solutions in this forum. And it has grown in size. The last edition, hundreds of thousands of people now attend these events. And this is becoming, the TED Talk, TEDx, we call it. Every city is hosting TED. This is happening the same thing for maker movement. So the maker is being exported now around the world. It came to Paris in June this year, big success. In Rome, it's coming everywhere now. And this is essentially promoting what we call personalized manufacturing or distributed manufacturing, which is enabled by these low-cost, open-source electronic components. See, before, if you want to make an electronic product, you need to have, an Intel chip, big technology components made by big, expensive companies that are very expensive, right? But today, you can buy this thing called Raspberry Pi, which is a computer the size of a credit card, okay? Literally, it can be connected to. Initially, it was designed to teach people programming. So you can connect it to keyboard and then to an output like a TV and you have a real computer, right? It cost $35, and today they are selling a few millions already. Okay, because you can make all kind of electronic product with this, right? This is called the open source hardware movement. Now you can do it at home, or if you don't like to do it at home, you can join a community now, like Tech Shop, which is again a do-it-yourself platform, a workshop, a physical environment where you pay about $175 a month, and you have access to all kind of high-end industrial equipment that you generally find only in big factories. This is available in an office space like this if you like. Here you can start making interesting products. Some of them could be for your personal use, or you can own hardware startup from here as well, which is happening right now more and more. Okay, but where it's interesting to conclude is what if you can take this maker movement, this MacGyver spirit, and bring it inside a company. So this is what I call the B2B version of the maker movement. This is going to be the bigger story. So what we saw in San Mateo is the B2C, the consumer side of the story. But now more and more companies are building their own maker space within their four walls. Okay, so like you have the cloud computing and you have the on-premise, right? We say in IT, same thing. This is the on-premise maker version. So this is from Ford, the car company, that 2 years ago set up a partnership with Tech Shop to open a tech shop in Detroit, where Ford is headquartered. And the idea is that Ford recognized, their previous CEO, Alan Mulally, that car makers, they don't make cars anymore, right? You design cars on a computer now, and everything is simulated virtually. And then you have the suppliers who make more and more subsystems for you, right? So the engineers don't have the physical contact anymore with the aspect of making cars. So the idea was, can we go back to the roots of the company, which is 100 years old, when Henry Ford built this first, quadricycle in a barn, right? He didn't have any computer at that time, right? So the idea is, how do you reconnect with this kind of, manual way of making cars? So for that, they opened this, tech shop in Detroit, where the idea is that if you are a Ford engineer and you file a patent, you get 3-month free access to this space. I call this a giant playground. Why? Because it's a playground like for kids, because when you go there, you can play as much as you want. Nobody will judge you. Nobody will say, oh, that's a stupid idea. What are you doing, right? Your boss will ask you that on Monday morning at work, but here, when you come play in the evening and weekends, nobody is there to criticize you, right? So that's important, because what people don't understand is that if you want to become innovative as a company, you don't need, you need more freedom. And here you have plenty of freedom, and you have a lot of support from other people in that space who are willing to support you. And if you don't know something, they don't say you're stupid. They say, how can I, improve your knowledge, right? So there's this kind of very supportive environment that allows these people to come up with more and more disruptive solutions. As a matter of fact, 2 years, just 2 years after setting up this environment at Ford, the company has increased the patentable ideas by over 100%. 50% was 1 year ago. 2 years later, 100%, more than 100%, without increasing the R&D spending. That goes back to my first slide. You don't need to keep investing more R&D. Investing more and more in freeing your people to innovate. Okay? And this is what I mean by, you heard about the 20% free time that Google gives to employees. That's time dimension. But a crucial dimension is space. We don't talk about it. So you need both dedicated time, but then you need dedicated space to play. That's why I call it playground, not playtime. Right? So the playground is becoming very, very important, because you need to stay away from the headquarters, I call it, as far as possible, to do these kind of things. So so this is something that is being emulated by other companies. BMW is going to open a similar version of it in Munich, Germany, in March next year. So you're going to begin to see more and more, B2B or corporate version of this as well. So anyway, so that was the kind of the last message, right? Which is, if you want stability and frugality, you need to include all employees in the innovation process. And for that, the 20% free time is one dimension. but creating a dedicated, playful environment is another dimension as well. So that was pretty much I think I went way over time, but I apologize, but there was so much material to share that I always get too excited. But so this is something you'll discover more when you read in the book. There are gazillions of examples of this kind of, clever innovation or companies that can apply these principles to innovate faster, better, cheaper. And this is my next, published by The Economist in February next year in the US and Europe, which looks at the same ideas that we talked about here, but bring it to the US and Europe to say that, look, you need to start doing this way, frugally, flexibly, inclusively, not just in India, China, Africa, but also in US and Europe as well, because we have a need, for doing more with less as well. So that was it, and I'm happy to now, get questions and have a discussion. Yes, please.
Navi, thanks. Really great overview, good insights. I love the examples. So you're getting your head all sparkling inside. Wonderful. World Series update 8-0.
Okay.
You didn't mention the word sustainability in any of this. Is there a reason why? How come that's not part of your nomenclature?
When we said the Unilever example, clearly, was focused on sustainability. In other words, the idea of, doubling revenues while reducing, carbon footprint. Except that what I'm trying to say, and two ways to answer the question. I didn't use sustainability because oftentimes the moment we say that, people think CSR, some kind of, social responsibility initiative, right? Company does as a side business. And meanwhile, we keep, doing business as usual. And then if you want to talk about sustainability, go talk to my corporate affairs people, or somebody in the company who is dealing with CSR. What we are trying to say is that, yes, absolutely, sustainability is important, but let's embed it in the core business model, right? So that, every product you make, every service you offer, can you rethink it from the perspective of sustainability? And not just say, like, we keep doing business as usual and just sign a check, to plant some trees, I cannot joke, like, there are some companies, I don't want to name them, but you cannot just, like, plant trees in Indonesia, taking over, big chunks of the forest in Amazonia to make furniture, right? So that becomes very hypocritical. So the idea is, like, can you make sustainability the heart of what you do? The circular economy is exactly that. How do you essentially reduce dependence on natural resources and cleverly reuse what you already have? And in this book, we explain is that in emerging market, sustainability is a must-do because you don't have resources, so by default you are sustainable. But in this book, I have 40 case studies, and 25 of them are pioneers of sustainability. That means that I'm going to give a sneak preview of a company. For example, Marks and Spencer, a major retailer in the United Kingdom, has something called Plan A. And they came up with the term because they said there's no Plan B. So Plan A goal is to making the Marks and Spencer the world's most sustainable major retailer by 2020. So we are thinking about, all the products to make it more sustainable, all their factories, and then go work with the suppliers to make the suppliers and the suppliers more sustainable as well. So I think this notion of sustainability, I'm very blunt here, at least in the US, is still seen as a nice to do thing or a must do thing, because it's a compliance. You have to do it, for God's sake kind of thing, because the government requires it. But what we need to do is bring a new mindset that says you can actually be sustainable and actually make more money. And that's kind of what we are beginning to talk about. Like, how do you reconcile, profitability and sustainability, which today are still seen in most corporate execs' mind, as two irreconcilable, kind of, variables. But I totally agree with you. I mean, that's why, many of the examples that we talked about deal with sustainability, but also in sustainability, remember there are three dimensions of sustainability, right? There is the environmental sustainability, which everybody knows, saving the planet and preserving the environment. The other two dimensions we don't talk about is also the social sustainability, right? For example, like the Essilor, creating jobs in Indian villages is because you don't want villagers to leave the country to the city. That actually creates a disruption, right, from a social standpoint, right? So social and cultural sustainability are important as well. Unilever's rival in Brazil, it's called Natura. They actually source raw materials from some far remote tribes in Amazon forest. Because they are saying is that if you don't do that, the cultural knowledge of cultivating these plants will be lost. That's a big loss. So that's a cultural sustainability as well. So sustainability has so many dimensions, but I think right now we talk often about the environmental sustainability, but my concern more and more is about the social dimension of sustainability and the cultural dimension as well. And I think this is something that is seen as well, we can deal with that as part or our philanthropic arm, but we are saying no. You need to make it part and parcel, of your core business model, and that takes a very different mindset, which is kind of what we talked about. Other thoughts, comments? Yes, please.
Yeah, what you just said is very interesting because most people are thinking sustainability in terms of resourcing natural resources and not polluting and not
Preserving resources. Yeah, yeah,
preserving,
yeah.
um, but we indeed don't think enough about cultural and minorities and ethnic
Mm-hmm.
just simply disappearing.
Absolutely.
It's a whole part of humanity as well. It's determined.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I really think it's very interesting that people should start thinking more about
Mm-hmm.
the cultural aspect as well.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm working on.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. In what way? What level? Just share with us.
I'm passionate. It's not about me right now.
It's okay.
But I'm very passionate about traditional cultures that are disappearing very fast, including India, and how to find a way to maintain that,
Preserve the knowledge. Yeah.
preserve the knowledge, all the while um, not not denying modernity. How do you combine both? Right. So that's it's sort of
Interesting.
very interesting that you just mentioned that.
Right. I mean, I don't have an answer to that, but I think one way that I think I'm beginning to see some interesting innovation, which I talk about here in a way, but this one we go deeper into it, is that the reason we cannot handle that. Let me kind of go concrete example. Danone, which makes yogurt, has built a factory in Bangladesh. Literally, they put the factory in a far remote villages, right? And this factory is 10% of the size of regular factories, okay? And it costs much less to build. And unlike Western factories that are highly automated, this one relies on manual processes, okay? So the idea was essentially to think small, because what happens is that the more you make things big, like factories, big factories, which is the pyramid model, right? You have one or two big factories, then you ship your products in big trucks to big supermarkets, and people drive miles to go shop them, right? Which makes no sense. Anyway, so this is the pyramid model of production and consumption today. But if you start going to what we call a horizontal economy, where you can start having smaller production units and distribution units, that becomes more interesting. So innocently, when I was talking about the tech shop, etc., that's where we are heading. The pyramid is collapsing now, right? And we see that already in emerging markets, but that's going to come in a high-tech version in the West with things like tech shop, etc. So and you see that also with local sourcing, from local farmers, etc., and all these models. So I think the reason that didn't happen is because among other things, right? The business model of how do you scale down, never thought. We always think about scaling up. So I've been talking about this notion of scaling out. Instead of scaling up, which is what we heard in the economic theory, scale out. So economies of scope become as important as economies of scale. And we knew that, but making it happen was harder before. But I see it's starting to change. New models emerging, new technologies emerging, and I would say new consciousness. young people more and more saying like, well, we don't want to work for big companies. We are more interested, in joining a startup and being a free, freelance agent, etc. So I think this desire for there's a good book, as you know, famous one by Shoemaker. It's called Small is Beautiful. It's a classic book. It's like a very famous book. And it's a good book because he actually talks about small is beautiful in the sense that you can create more and better economic and social value by being small and yet preserve the environment. So again, it's not mutually exclusive. This notion that you can preserve local cultures and local communities and at the same time make money as well. But schools and this is my blunt take, we don't teach that yet. We still teach except health, of course. Of course, health may be an exception. I know. Okay. So, but I think that's kind of what my vision is. My vision is that essentially we need to think about distributed supply chains. We need to think about, Jeremy Rifkin also talked about the lateral economy, or what I call the horizontal economy. So I call it think horizontal and not think vertical anymore. And horizontal also means more partnership. Don't try to do everything yourself, partner more and more. So, I know it's evening. It's very hard. You must have had a long day as well. So, any case, so anyway, I think we have still time for refreshments. I will be around for next half an hour or so. Yeah, come grab me and we can have an informal chat and take a look at the book, and we'll be happy to sign it as well. And then on the whenever you feel you need to sleep and you cannot sleep, you can read the first few pages and then you can fall asleep. So it's a good for as a sleeping pill as well. So, all right, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the translation. Hi. Nice meeting you.